Volume 1, Chapter 1. The day was still young when Vorsheld heard his calling. The man in the street who had nothing was bawling, crying for those who weren't in with a shout, and praying to God for his son to come out. Slowly dying to tell somebody the news, he rolled up his paper and threw out the rules, smoking the fags that denied him his life, each one a stab in the back with a knife. Watching the poor rotten egg getting older, the Great Dane with a fish and a chip on his shoulder, buttering up the soldiers that had a great fall by making a meal out of nothing at all. Setting his sights on a slippery slope, the child aimed higher and adjusted his scope. He shot through the ice, and feeling the spring, the snow began to melt and the caged birds started to sing. Chapter 2. Carried away by the outgoing tide, rushing too fast and swimming with pride, leaving his old life to drown in his sorrow and hatching his plans for a better tomorrow, packing his bags on a wooden erection with the dysfunctional family men who rigged the election, building a home with a blue-pill popper that had a lot of brass but not enough copper. Weeks turned to months, and months into ash, spent all alone with his friends, burning cash, who were tricked by some credit hogs into starting a fire and settling the debt of a grass-smoking buyer. Wasted in the city where the team players drank, striking the matches they threw on the bank, betting on the wise man to send him the bill, Vorsheld sat and listened to the fool on the hill. Chapter 3. Sat on the fence with her feet getting colder, the girl with the weight of the world on her shoulder, nursing a pain in the neck of the wood and policing the gates with a stick in the mud, spying the old man who worked on the till that was under the bridge and over the hill, sneaking away to her unpleasant surprise with blood in his hands and fear in his eyes. The heroine injected into his mind a crazy idea and one of a kind, to turn himself into the brainwashed monster that frightened to death his anonymous sponsor. She decided to move on come what may and promised to meet herself halfway, hitching a ride with the travelling band who made her head inflate and her mind expand. Chapter 4. Shying away from the things she said, the boy with a sobering thought in his head, losing his bottle and finding his feet, tapping along to the broken heartbeat, taking the high road and leaving her low for leading him somewhere he didn't want to go. The rambling man whose face grew long got tired of waiting and had to be strong, working away, not making a sound, ignoring the tears that watered the ground, digging up the past and acting strange, then burying the future with seeds of change. Tired of dealing with the Red Queen's weed that grew up to be his friend in need, he threw down his spade and snapped at the pack, telling his master he didn't know Jack. Chapter 5. Following on from his heart's big break, doing odd jobs for pieces of cake, the bozo that loved to sniff the blow got lost in the black of his forest gâteau. He was pressed in a jam and left on the shelf. 'Twas a sticky mess that he made for himself, kissing the slapper that took off her clothes and stuck the sweet powder up his red nose. The fans were coughing and spewing hot air when Vorsheld rode into the county fair, cheering the strong man that carried the clowns with scales on their backs weighing thousands of pounds. Sat like a statue on the head of a gorgon, the ringmaster whistled and whipped out his organ. Bidding good day and wishing them well, he beckoned and started to play with himself. Chapter 6. Playing along with the gay puppeteer who fiddled away and acting so queer, pulling the strings of his favourite toy that turned out to be a real live boy, coaxing the crew that he joined at the hip and throwing dead rats from their sinking ship. The piper drowned the labourers and cast out to sea the ministers that refused to pay Hamlin's fee, blowing his top and the wind from their sails, a conservative party of filthy rich whales, doing their business and reporting the news for the poor little fishes with nothing to lose. The carnival owner was cruising behind with a boatload of euros that sank in his mind when Vorsheld banked right and fired his rockets, burying the country's national treasure in his back pocket. Chapter 7. Drawing the line with a nudge and a wink as he signed his cheque in invisible ink, the economist with the price on his head in the clouds started wiping the smiles from their face in the crowd. Beaten up by the popular kids at the Virgin School for not doing their homework and playing it cool, the tricky rich learned a valuable lesson from the poor research, while the human garbage got stoned by the bricks of the church. Dumping the rubbish that threatened his life, Vorskjeld set off in search of his soon-to-be wife, a fantasy marriage of love and regret that was plucked from his vision in the night while he slept, mushrooming a trip down memory lane, looking back in anger and hiding his shame from the voice on the radio that showed him the way to roll on tomorrow and live for today. Chapter 8. Choosing the hard way and taking his time, Vorskjeld moved mountains and started to climb, braving the cold for his axe-wielding girl and fighting his way to the top of the world, chasing the Komodo dragon for running her down and slapping his cheek on the backside of town, gunning his engine and shooting his load. He came up his rear in the middle of the road, tightening the guitarist's muscles with little Apple nanomachines in his head. The Manhattan Island of Neckers tried to sleep paralyze him to death while they chopped down the first-person tree that blocked the Griffin's view from the Greg, who was watching like an elucidated Family Guy dreamer with the spirit of his godfather Ted, thanking and pleasing himself to their greetings as he spied on the brethren at their ebonite meetings, New York towering over the babelfish and cutting them in thirds for failing to translate his magic native tongue-twisted words. Chapter 9. Joining the club where she swept up the floor for the big bouncing baby that worked on the door, the sick family planner professed his affection by sticking used needles in her protection, taking the pills the doctor prescribed that came with a prize for the girls to decide. Vorskjeld bummed a band-aid from the hospital shop and gave her a taste of her own cherry pop. He dealt with the old horny devil that lied in wait for a sign from his runaway bride, who was tied up and flogged by a bent traffic cop to be sold as a snuffing slave when the investigating stopped. Watching the dancer that slid on the pole, riding the missile he fired in the hole, the king of the castle started to cheer and told him just what he wanted to hear. Chapter 10. The hour was late when Vorskjeld awoke, tired of listening and sorry he spoke, rubbing his eyes with lemon and lime, spriting the dream-weavers for wasting his time, cutting his way through the tangling mess that blocked his path of least distress, powering through the worrying throng, making his way he won't belong. Kicking the bucket and punching their tickets, the umpires struck out and bowed their last wickets, catching the batters out in the fray for moving too slowly and blowing them away, taking the lead where sleeping dogs lied, watching the real world passing him by, standing alone in the pouring rain, going nowhere on a runaway train. Mwah, 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 mwah.